Okay, thank you for joining us today for VU Ltd Practical Guides for Getting Back to Work series. Today's webinar focuses on the psychology and mental health issues associated with returning to work. Everybody has joined us in listen-only mode, so please use the chat box for questions as we go. My coordinator will look out for them and bring them to my attention. Can I just check that everyone's chat box is working? If you could just send me a hi Vic message, that would be great. That would be very helpful. Yeah, hi Claire, great. Hi Natasha. Hi Carol. Okay, so it looks like all the chat boxes are working. I'm Victor Ubogu from VU Ltd, a sports travel and hospitality business. Alongside me are Dr. Phil Hopley, a medical doctor, consultant psychiatrist, founder of Cognacity, an industry-leading expert on resilience, performance, and mental well-being. Hi, Phil.
Vic. Hi, good to see you.
How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you, thank you. And as well as my former front row colleague at Bath, Lee Mears, who went on to play for England and the British and Irish Lions. Lee is now an experienced executive coach at Preston Associates, angel investor and mentor. He's co-founder of Teacup, the wellbeing app, which we'll hear more about later. Hi, Lee.
How you doing, Vic? Hello, everybody.
At this point, we don't know yet when live sporting events will be back up and running. In the interim, I've had to diversify and are selling PPE, face masks, sanitizers, and nitrile gloves. Compared to sporting events, it's not that exciting, but I've had to adapt. My staff have been on furlough leave since the beginning of April, and are not due back until the end of July at the earliest. So how do I motivate my staff to get back to work and look after their mental well-being? Phil, can we start with an insight into the psychology and mental health of those people who are on furlough and those who are working remotely?
Yeah, I'd be delighted to kick that off, Vic, and thanks again for having me on. It's an honor to join you guys on stage today. Look, as a psychiatrist, this has been a fascinating and actually quite a challenging period. The last 3 weeks since we went into lockdown, we would have anticipated a lot of people in the early stages struggling with anxiety, focused maybe on health, because COVID is a very serious illness and the impact on those that contract it is serious. We also recognized there was going to be a period of adjustment where people had to adapt to working remotely from home, losing the support that you would have from your colleagues, your peer group at work, plus also having to balance for many people the demands of looking after others, either older generation or kids who need support through remote schooling and all of that. Allied with that, unfortunately for some of the population, issues to do with bereavement have come up because we've seen what's happened to death rates. And now we're moving towards the end of that sort of lockdown period. So anxieties are on the rise again. What does going back to work mean? What does it look like? What are the practicalities? What is 2 meters? What is 1.5 meters? What is 1 meter? How do I get to work? What are the risks associated with travel, etc.? So in a good way, I think from a personal perspective, the focus on well-being through this period has been quite rightly front and center. And I hope that we can today share some very useful information, but also help people to recognize it's an important focus to carry on. What have we been advising people to do? Well, the first thing is just to recognize that these are highly unusual times and human beings do take some time to adapt. On the whole, we're quite resilient, and it would be, I think, abnormal to have no psychological reaction. So if you weren't feeling uncertain, anxious, at times a bit down, low, kind of frustrated, bored, that would be unusual. So to have some transient and changing experiences in your emotions is really entirely normal. But one of the key things to do in situations like this is to keep things in perspective, to really recognize where you are, and where that is relative to other challenges you're facing. Many of us, when we're feeling under threat or stressed, find that our attention gets narrowed down onto that threat or that stressor. That's part of our neurobiology. That's our fight-flight response. And actually, that's quite unhealthy in these situations, because what it tends to do is make us ruminate or churn over or worry about things continuously. And we turn short-term stress into chronic long-term stress. And that's where health problems come in. So a key thing that we can all do is keep things in proportion and try to stand back from those things that are making us anxious and look more broadly at what we've got. Many of us are very fortunate to still have lots of positives in our lives, whether we've been furloughed, we're working from home, or even unemployed. You know, we've got family, we've got our health, we've got things that we've been doing over many years. It's very easy under pressure to turn our attention just to the negatives and struggle. And the other thing I'd say that's been an absolute sort of lifeline for many people has been how to recreate a proper routine at home. Because it's very easy, if you're someone who's overcommitted to working all of the time, just to get up in the morning, switch on your laptop, start working, stay in your pajamas, and find yourself through to lunchtime without having taken a break or longer. And that, of course, is unhealthy. So having routine and structure, trying to mimic as much as we can of our pre-COVID, pre-lockdown existence is vitally important. And within that, look at the core elements of well-being: rest, recovery, sleep, diet, exercise, taking regular breaks during the day. And I think for a lot of people, even though it's been a very challenging period, there's been a lot of upsides as well. So being able to spend more time with our families, being able to have more meaningful time with our families, taking all of that commuting time that most of us would have spent, I don't know what that would be, 8 to 12 hours per week for a lot of people working in regular full-time employment, and converting that into more useful activity elsewhere. But I think the thing I'd come back to is that now, as we're moving out of lockdown, that routine is going to be just as important as it has been during lockdown.
That's very interesting. Excuse me. That's very interesting about routine. I mean, prior to lockdown, I had a routine: wake up early in the morning, hour swim in the pool, shower, breakfast with the kids, drop the kids off at school, and then go to the office. I mean, at VU, prior to the furlough period, when schools are closed down, we started remote working. And I know from our experience that my staff with very young kids struggled with homeschooling and working from home. I mean, I find it difficult because I miss the natural routine and the buzz of the office. I mean, I've heard stories of people with one laptop at home, families with one laptop at home, or no laptop at all, no garden, or no internet, and the difficulties that they experience. I mean, that must lead to some very stressful situations. Lee, how have you and your young family coped?
Well, it's been interesting, Vic, and I don't think anybody should punish themselves. I mean, when your personal life and your working life collide, you're going to get some chaotic days. And I'll put my hands up and openly admit it's been a roller coaster. There's days where I think, yes, I'm winning. I don't have to commute to London, or I don't have any big trips. I'm going to spend quality time with the family. And then there'll be other days where it dips down, and having 3 boys, it's quite chaotic. And so you have real days where you're motivated and real days where you don't have that motivation. And for me, as a leadership coach and leading, and helping people to lead through remote teams, I think it's been a really interesting period. Firstly, and bouncing off Dr. Phil's comments, is that you've got to set expectations. You've really got to sort of talk to your team and say, right, this is the new norm. Nobody's done this before. What are we going to do? Let's get some ground rules out there. Is it video calls? Is it, because what I've seen a lot of in the workplace is people just replace their normal day for their working day. And it doesn't work like that. You've got some people, like you say, with kids that they might need to now get to take them to school. So they can't be online at 9 a.m. But, by goodness, if you extend trust, and this is the big thing that I've seen out there, people that have trusted, they thought this would never work. They've given their employees trust, and they're getting, repaid. Some of the productivity's gone through the roof but you've got to let people be flexible. Another one I've seen a lot of is just staring into the screen. If you think you can stare into a screen from 9 till 5, you'll go absolutely crazy. So it's about breaking your day up. Your day may be longer, but you'll get through the work. And so as a leadership bit, one thing I have sort of been getting people to do is, rather than measure the hours at work, start to really look at what the issue is and how do we solve that problem, and then praise people for their activity rather than hours on the job.
Yeah, totally agree with you, Lee. I mean, here at home, we had wobbly moments to start with until we agreed a daily family routine. I mean, it hasn't been plain sailing, and we've had the usual teenager tantrums. However, having a routine in place helped immensely. So I mean, that's how I sort of coped with it as you know, with my family. I mean, how have you coped personally, Lee?
Oh, crikey, yeah. It's I always thought I had a very good balance. I tried to work on sort of, you know, bit of hard work, and then, as you know, Victor, I'd be corrupted by you, and we'd have a bit of a play, and so there was always lots of activities, and I did find myself at one point, I think my wife said she's never seen me work so hard. It was the prospect of homeschooling or working, so I've concentrated on work for a fair bit. But yeah, as I say, for me, it has been very much up and down, and I'm starting to get better at it, but it's a learning process.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I found, you know, when we first started working remotely is when you set up the Zoom calls with the team, and you know, the working mothers and the young kids homeschooling, the kids are trying to get into the Zoom, into the call, and they're sort of trying to keep them out. And eventually, I just said, look, I'm very relaxed. Let the kids in. Let's all say hi, and you know, everyone can relax. It's just us talking. It's how it is now. So let's just get on with it. You know, but I think we sort of got a lot better from that moment onwards. You know, where there was just relaxation about the children coming in and getting involved in the meetings, up to a point, of course.
But I think that was a real cycle. There was a time where at first everybody was online on Zoom, Microsoft Teams, Business, Skype for Business, whatever it was. And then that was really, really draining. And so, of course, then it tailed off. And then it sort of came back up because people are starting to miss that social interaction again. I've had some of my best sort of client calls actually just saying to someone, let's get out in the fresh air and let's do it on the phone. We don't need to stare at each other. So I think there are definite ways, but as again, I will say all the way along, it's a bit of an experiment. Nobody's been here before, so try different things out.
Yeah, I would come in on that, Lee, and say, always look for what the opportunity is in these challenge situations. So Vic, very nice description there of the social awkwardness that we feel because our office has now become the children's playroom, come the sort of walkway that people go through to go and do something different. And in a very sort of British way, we're all sort of, you know, oh my goodness me, what impression is this creating? Like that poor chap who was on the BBC News that time whose kids invaded. You know, we've just got to accept that this is the new way of life. We do our best to keep it as structured as we can. But actually, I think in terms of team building, seeing managers, leaders and peers in their own habitat and in the real kind of existence that they've got is a very healthy thing, because it tends to then stop us making that complete cutoff between work and home life, which I know for some people who like to control everything is really important for them, but that's not the reality, and it won't be the reality going forward. So I think having that flexibility and that ability to just be a little bit more relaxed about things in the long run is going to benefit everybody. And there was a great question came in on the Q&A from, I think that's Paul Williamson, saying about how, you know, we've learned to cope and what new habits should we take back when we go into the office. Well, we'll cover this in a bit more detail, Paul, but on this particular point, I think that understanding more about our peers and the people we work with and having that personal interest, that is vital. If we turn our back on that or try and go back to the old ways, I think the credibility will be lost and leaders will really struggle to maintain their kind of credibility in that position.
Yeah, there's an interesting comment that's come through the chat from Jenny. Why pretend it's all official and professional when we're looking at a new way? Be relaxed as much as you can. As long as we're delivering, that's all that matters.
Yeah.
Which always reminds me of my playing days, because I hated training. I I always said to the coach, judge me on Saturday, game time. I will be there. I won't let you down.
Yeah, and you know, there's kind of there's history around these things. If you took somebody in the 1970s and 1980s who worked in the city and said in 15 years' time no one will wear suits, they would have choked on their traditional roast beef lunch. That's what would have happened. And yet that change has happened, and there's a new way of working. And as Jenny quite rightly says, this is part of this evolution. We're going to be working in different ways because we find ways, and humans are very resilient, and they find ways of kind of reducing stress in their environments by coming to agreements about how things should operate. So I think probably younger people will find this transition a lot easier. And my advice to people in management and senior positions is actually, you know, you want to be listening to the younger people, because they are the digital generation. They understand how all of this operates. And this is all about developing, kind of expanding on working practices for the future. So why wouldn't we listen to the people that are going to be the leaders of the future?
Yeah, that's another good comment from Mark Dow. It brings a good laugh and relaxes the meeting when my boys pop into the Zoom to say hello to their team. It normalizes and personalizes things in a very strange time.
Yeah, yeah. It's a
Yeah,
great
I mean,
point.
one of the things I've always spoken about is that, you know, people talk about work-life balance, and you know, fundamentally it doesn't exist. The work has become, your work is your life, and the more you can bring that and weave it into work, into real life, the more it works. It should coexist, and I think, you know, having your kids pop in shows you're human. I think people being able to see what's behind you, interests them. That really, you know, taking that armor of that pinstripe suit of the city, we're trying to get more, especially as we're leading people, more out of people. And that discretionary effort comes when you really understand the person that's leading you is human.
I think the interesting phrase I heard recently, Lee, on that was that work-life balance used to be a thing that looked like that. It was like a weighing skills, and now it's a blend. It's coming together. There's a blend between work and life, which can only be a healthy thing. And I love Paul's follow-up comment about the positive side being that we can get closer to our clients because we feel more emotionally connected with them. Certainly the work I've done at Cognacity over the last 10 years would bear that out. The better the quality of the relationship you have with your clients, the more sticky, the more trust is developed, the more kind of work that will flow from that, because it's based on that strength of the relationship. So I agree with that. I think that's entirely valid.
You know, Tasha, that's the same comment made by Charles. You know, work to live, don't live to work.
Yes.
All very important. So the return to work is going to be a slow phased approach. I mean, Phil, how do we get the furloughed staff and those working remotely in the right frame of mind to return to the office?
Yeah, I mean, well, if you've been furloughed and you've got the opportunity to get back to work, I would like to think that that is already stimulating you and is a great positive, because, you know, a lot of people that have been furloughed are thinking, what is going to happen to my employment? Is my job still going to be there for me at the end of this period? So I think there's a cohort who will just be thrilled to come through it. I think for everybody, though, one of the biggest challenges is going to be literally, how do I get from home back into the office? Because we're all being told, certainly on public transport in the UK, we must be wearing face masks. So that's a constant reminder that we're still facing a threat on a day-to-day basis. I've seen this with a number of medical colleagues and their partners where they've continued to work in acute services in hospitals. It's been very stressful for the other half when that person goes off to work every day, is exposed to risks related to the virus because of the environments they're working in, and then comes home and potentially is bringing that risk into the house. So I think there's a piece of work to be done there, even before people start to go back into the office, to help them understand the reality of the risk, keeping things in perspective and explaining to them what support's available. Organizations then obviously are going to have to do some massive kind of project work around what does the workspace look like? How do we protect the 2 meters or the 1 meter, and are people facing the same direction rather than facing each other. So there's a whole heap of work to be done there. But I think if that's done right, and I think if that's messaged out in a positive way, that's a real benefit, and it will reduce anxiety for people coming back. The one thing that research has told us, even from prior to this current challenge, is that during periods of quarantine or work from home or lockdown, the two things that organizations that can do that are really positive for people's psychological well-being is communicate clearly and frequently, and also to provide resources. So as long as the messages are coming out and it's very clear that organizations are providing what's required, down to the basics like hand sanitizers and more face masks in the office, it's the stuff that gives us that. It gave us a lot of reassurance at the start of this period, but actually it's still as important. I think a lot of people have forgotten about the happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you. All those things really need to be reinforced. And as we get into this new phase, kind of reiterate where we are and then start to take things forward.
Excellent. Anything to add, Lee?
Well, I was just going to say that on the leadership side of things is making people really excited about going back to work, because there will be that underlying fear. And it sort of answers Paul Williams's question is, you know, what are the new habits? And saying to people, what is it that you've really enjoyed about the lockdown period? So which bits are we going to take forward? And which bits have we really not enjoyed so that we will leave behind? Because it is a really good chance to rewrite the rules. Obviously in business, you want to hit your targets, and that's going to be in the back of your mind. But you imagine a leader painting a wonderful picture of how good it could be going back to work. And I think that will really empower people and want them to go back.
Yeah, it's a crucial time for managers and leaders. I mean, the point that Mark Dale puts here on about retraining and reintegrating staff who have been furloughed, you know, organizations who've got this right, we've worked with a number of them who've been very conscious about the importance of regular messaging to all their staff. Doesn't matter whether you're furloughed or whether you're working from home or whether you're moving between the two, because that for some organizations was how they managed this, you know, a month on or a month off, or however they structured it. And it's interesting if you think about natural experiments around people being off work and coming back to work. So maternity leave is a classic example of this, and it's been around forever and a day. And the reality is most women coming back to work after maternity leave, or dads who've taken extended paternity leave, they have that innate sense of having been left behind because everyone's been on a journey in the office. And we know absolutely from neurocognitive science that your knowledge, your skill base may not be as fresh as it was before, but your technical skills and your ability to relearn that quickly is unchanged. So the vast majority of people who come back into work after an extended period, they are anxious at the beginning, but they very, very quickly get up to speed. So that's what we would expect. For those that may be struggling, then we need to think about how do we recognize that at an early stage and how do we support them. And we'll be talking about that later on this morning.
I mean, Lee, to remain within government guidelines, I understand that in some circumstances, people returning to work, you've got half your team are going to be working from home 1 week and then working in the office the following week. I mean, how do we go about motivating in that sort of circumstance where you've got 50% of your team at home, working from home, and 50% in the office?
Well, again, it's a bit like we said earlier with sport, is you want to really galvanize and create those teams and almost make them feel like they're together, they're embedded, and they're pulling in one direction. And it goes back to my point. And again, they say the simplest things are the easiest to pick up, which is why I seem to get away with it. But it's about having that common goal, doing something together rather than hours working on it. And then you'll be able to cycle your teams in and see how their area, those teams coming in week on, week off, are going, aligning to the goal and what they're delivering. So it's about more communication, because in this environment, that's the thing that people have missed, just being able to walk up to someone's desk. And we know that if emails go on past 10 lines, I definitely don't read them. So how do you communicate effectively?
Okay, great. Thank you, Lee. We've got a question from Paul Williamson. Now we've learned to cope, what new habits should we continue when we return to normal?
Well, I'm happy to kick that one off. I mean, I think that the choice is really for individuals and teams to make, to discuss it, to find out, as Lee said earlier, what have you enjoyed, what's been beneficial, what hasn't helped so much. So just to give a very silly personal example, we've got 4 kids, 3 of them are teenagers at school, and one of them's a 21-year-old. And as a psychiatrist in the early stages of this, we were very, very busy. You can probably imagine, you know, the demand for consultations for people who are struggling with anxiety and mood changes was significant. And we followed your lead, Vic. We set up a kind of family rota for all the activities, dishwasher, cleaning the kitchen, laundry, all of this. And it was fairly military precision. And we've got a dog, and after about 2 weeks, our poor dog was waving the white flag of surrender, because walking the dog was definitely the nicest of the tasks to be doing. Everyone wanted to do it all the time. But I remember in the second week, my eldest daughter, who's 21, came in, and she changed the rota. And instead of it saying walk the dog, it said walk dad, because I'd been overworking, and she'd recognized that I really wasn't taking breaks, so she'd put that in. So yeah, I think if we're talking about what we've done and how it's been flexed and what we've enjoyed and what's been more challenging, there should be an opportunity in this pool to share and actually learn from each other. Many teams that kind of we've advised and I've read about in other settings have created lots of new interactive things they've been doing, usually driven by the younger people because they're a bit more kind of, you know, intuitive and switched on to these things. Well, why would we want to stop all of that stuff? We weren't doing it before COVID, but there's a clear benefit. So why would we want to be stopping all that stuff? But I think it's to be led for discussions within teams and organizations, and keep our ears really open to what maybe the younger, the lower cohorts are interested in doing.
Fantastic, thank you. Coming. There's quite a few here now. Just one question here. The furlough scheme will have created division and fear in businesses that have used the scheme to furlough some of their staff, but not all. Managers have often had a difficult choice to make regarding who to furlough and who not to. This will lead to resentment from those still working and fear among those furloughed that they could be first in line for redundancy. I mean, how do we best deal with this sort of scenario?
I wondered, Lee, whether there's something around the teacup model in this, because it's people taking different kind of perspectives on the same kind of threat in a way. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you a quick snapshot overview of Teacup. So we were building Teacup before COVID-19 happened, and it's a wellness app that helps you reflect. And one of the things that we've been madly passionate about is that you control your own wellness. And Phil, you know that it's, you know, you control your thoughts, your feelings, and your behaviors. So we'd designed and built an app that allows you to self-reflect. So every day you fill out 10 questions and it monitors your wellness and the makeup of your wellness, your health, happiness, and success. And so we've deployed this and been using businesses because of remote working, because of people not being able to touch base regularly, and to also pass the responsibility back onto themselves, as you're in charge of your own wellness. And it's been a brilliant monitoring tool that's really started to fly, because now the company invests in the people, and then they are able to monitor and track their own wellness. You can't see individuals' wellness, but you can see teams. So it's been a really good way, like Victor said earlier, if you're on that rotation, you can almost gamify it. You can say, right, which team is trending up at the moment in their wellness, which team is trending down. But it's a really good way to have a live monitor constantly, rather than these 30, 60, 90-day surveys. So that's how we've sort of brought Teacup in, and how businesses are using it.
Actually, that answers the next question on how best to monitor the well-being of employees. Sorry, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I mean, I think that something like that, having an app that gives you data and makes it measurable and makes it visible, is a huge driver of behavior change, which is probably what we're going to be looking at most in this well-being revolution that we're seeing. I remember about 4 or 5 years ago, my kids bought me a Fitbit for Christmas. And, you know, like you guys, played rugby to a very high level, was training regularly. But then when that went behind me, my kind of exercise routine really did change significantly. And I was horrified to see that on 2 of the days per week, my steps in the day were about 2,500, and the American Cardiac Association recommends for men of our vintage a minimum of 10,000 steps per day just to maintain your cardiovascular health. So I was way below what would be regarded as healthy behavior. And the reason for that was on those 2 days I drove from home to a hospital, I parked in the car park, I walked up to my office. During the day, I would walk out to the waiting room, bring clients in to see me. I'd go to lunch in the canteen. I might pop out to the bathroom. I'd come down the stairs, go home in the car, and that was it. So by being able to see data that was a real driver of my well-being, I basically got shot of using the car. And on those 2 days, I'd use public transport, which meant that you were at least walking to the bus stop, and then from the bus stop at the other end. And then I would make sure that on one of those 2 days, I would try and put some exercise in there at some point in the day, even if it was just to walk around the hospital gardens. So I think you're absolutely right, Lee. Having a vision on something, being able to actually see it and choose to track it. You don't have to. A lot of people get very paranoid about data confidentiality, but as you say, this isn't individual data that organizations see. They see teams, so they can say, right, well, in the X division or in the kind of admin pool, this really isn't looking good. So we can think about what can we do to try and instill within leadership and within everyone at sort of foot soldier level that kind of initiative, drive, motivation, and also the resources and support they need to be able to address this. Because ultimately, well-being is going to be one of the biggest business drivers for the coming, whatever, the future. You know, if we're not looking after our people and looking after ourselves and not insightful enough to look after ourselves, then we stand no chance of being able to sustain the kind of performance that's going to be required to get us through a very challenging period of recession.
I mean, this has been it's been really powerful, is that you are, because wellness is so subjective, where do you put your money? What do you invest in? And so this has been great for businesses to see that you can literally measure the impact of your intervention, whether that is open plan officing, whether that is a gym. The data will come back to say, yes, the team are healthier and happier and more successful.
There's a question from Paul, directly to you, Phil. I know I'm zoomed out, having worked relentlessly for 13 weeks and no day off. How can we keep people energized when many people have been working harder than ever?
So, Paul, this is where we draw on our insights from performance psychology. Cognacity, we work with a lot of elite athletes across 15 different sports in the UK. There's only one key cardinal difference between people winning gold medals or competing in the Premiership on a weekend and the rest of us who are mere mortals. And when we run sessions on this, you ask lots of kind of bright and informed audiences, and very few people get it. And I'm not going to ask the question now and wait for you to come back, so it'll take a long time. But the answer is recovery. The difference between athletes and ourselves is that they have recovery hardwired into their schedules every day. If you look at our workloads, we tend to be sort of flatlining on a bit up, but we're always working continually. Athletes, during the course of a day, over the course of a few hours, they're intensely working and they're recovering. So the answer to your question is to incorporate regular breaks into what we do. We now, as an organization, if we schedule an hour-long Zoom meeting, as Victor did at the beginning, we give a few minutes at the beginning to introduce, and we always end it 5 minutes early. So we give people 5 minutes to just have a break from what's coming next. And during that 5 minutes, there are lots of different things you can do, but the one thing you must do is get out of your seat and move. Our brains evolve to learn while moving. So if we stay sat down all day, we get Zoom fatigue, as you described it, and our cognitive function decreases. Get up, move, go and make yourself a cup of tea, get a glass of water. If you've got access to fresh air, some sunlight, that's a really good stimulating way just to clear the brain. And ideally, during the course of the day, have at least a period of 10 to 15 minutes where you can just do something. You don't have to be exercising formally, but you're on the move and you're kind of resetting what's happening. A lot of people like to listen to music, maybe use a meditation app like Headspace or something like that. Anything to sort of break the monotonous, kind of relentless drive of focus on our work.
Yeah, just getting back to Teacup, I will provide a link and details of it in my email post webinar. Any other questions? We've got time for one final question. Actually, there is one here from Wayne. How can untrained managers spot symptoms of mental health in the workforce?
It's a great question, Wayne. The mere fact you've asked it means you're a great manager or leader or whatever, because it's in your mind. So the first thing is to have an awareness. We use a very, very simple acronym, SAS. You know, think about the SAS, the way they work. They're focused, they're driven, they get in, they get the job done, they get out. SAS stands for spot signs, approach with care, and signpost. So the fact that you've got some awareness means that you would be aware that people maybe who are struggling, it's not just a performance issue, it might be related to their mental health. So what sort of things would we see? What would we sort of spot as signs? Usually their behavioral changes. Might be irritability, might be someone being more narky than they would normally be. They might be more quiet than they would normally be, or they're not as present, they're not as responsive. The nature of their communication has changed because they're kind of being a bit more clipped than they would be in emails, or they're really kind of dragging it out in a way that wouldn't show if they were normally as focused as they would be. So we might see some behavioral changes. From time to time, we'll see someone who's overtly upset. You can see that they're tearful. You can see that they're anxious. You can see that they're low in mood, and the way they communicate with you makes it really obvious. So if we can just be looking for signs, that's a great start. Now, if you spot something, the question is what to do. And the most important thing to remember is you are not a therapist. You're not there to intervene. The goal is to signpost them to help. The second S, to point them in the right direction. So what's the middle bit? The middle bit is A, approach with care. So you want to be able to have a conversation somewhere confidential, appropriate, where you can just ask them in a very open way how they're feeling. Most people, particularly blokes, will say, I'm fine, and then talk about the weather. So you need to be prepared to push past that and ask them again, or reflect to them to say, you know, I've noticed things are maybe slightly different, wondered if everything's okay. Most people will start to open up then. And then through a process of just asking and listening, repeating and reassuring, you can then get a sense that they understand that you're concerned about them, or they've recognized that for themselves, and then signpost them to help. For those of you that aren't aware of what support is available through your organizations, you know, just brush up on that before you have that conversation. So you can say, well, look, we've got an EAP provider, or there's an in-house counselor, or you could speak to your GP, whatever it would be. So SAS, spot the signs, approach with care, signpost, simple as that.
I'm afraid we're almost out of time. So I'd just like to sort of summarize. The key points I'll be taking away from today's webinar are: accept that anxiety is a normal response. SAS, as you just said, Phil, I mean, spot, approach, signpost. Team building, don't make it a part of the working day. I know in my experience of playing in high performance teams, the best teams aren't necessarily the ones that focus 100% on performance, but those that gelled, get on with each other, and play for each other. And finally, the 2 ears, 1 mouth approach, which you brought up, Lee. And that's one that I'll be applying at home to stay out of trouble with the boss. Thank you to Phil and Lee for sharing experiences and practical advice. Thank you to everyone else for attending this webinar. I will email a link of today's webinar. Please do give me some feedback and do share it with your colleagues. Our next webinar is next Tuesday, 30th at noon, and focuses on the legal and HR issues, where I'll be joined by Paul Lomas, Global HR Director for BB Financial Services, Jodie Hill, Founder and Managing Director of award-winning Thrive Law, and former England women's rugby captain, writer, founder of Inspiring Women, Catherine Spencer. Registration is free. We're looking forward to seeing you then. Thank you and goodbye.